All right, so we're diving into episode 6 of Ulysses today.
Hades.
Hades, right.
Yeah.
And it's all about, it takes place during Patty Dignam's funeral procession.
Right.
And we're going to be using this really fascinating video essay that someone sent in that kind of breaks down some of the major themes of this chapter. And I was just blown away by how much rich material there was about life, death, and, the whole kind of social scene in Dublin during this time.
Yeah, I think it was so captivating about Hades is that Joyce uses this really somber, backdrop of the funeral to expose the hypocrisy and the kind of underbelly of Dublin society.
Yeah.
So it's almost like even in the face of death, these characters can't escape their own kind of petty concerns and this social posturing that they're constantly engaging in.
Yeah, and it's like that moment when they talk about Reuben J. Dodd's son, right?
Right.
Who tried to commit suicide.
Yeah.
You think, oh my gosh, that's such a heavy topic. And instead of focusing on, the son's struggles, they're all like, oh, Dodd got cheated out of a few pennies by the boatman.
Right.
And it's darkly funny, but it's also just kind of messed up.
It really highlights the kind of callousness and the almost morbid fascination with the financial aspect of it,
Yeah.
rather than, the actual human tragedy that's unfolding.
Yeah.
And that hypocrisy really does permeate the entire episode.
It does, yeah, especially with Simon Dedalus.
Oh, absolutely.
He acts so concerned for Patty Dignam's kids, but then he refuses to contribute any money to actually help them out.
Right. It's all performance.
This all for show.
It's about appearances and this respectability rather than actual, genuine care.
Right.
And this really underscores the contrast with Bloom, because Bloom's the one who actually pledges
Right.
and pays a significant amount to support the Dignams.
He does, yeah.
Bloom's actions really speak louder than Simon's empty words.
They do. He's constantly being judged and misunderstood, even when he's genuinely trying to help. It's
Yeah.
like he's always on the outside looking in.
Totally.
And speaking of facades, I think the way Joyce portrays the church in this episode is pretty scathing, too.
Yeah, the funeral service itself comes across as this really rushed and impersonal ritual.
Yeah.
The priest is described as being bloated
Right.
and just kind of going through the motions.
Yeah.
And this ties into Bloom's own kind of evolving thoughts on religion, particularly the Catholic concept of resurrection.
Right, and he's definitely skeptical.
Oh, yeah.
He calls the cemetery a human junkyard at one point,
Yes.
which is a pretty bleak view compared to the others who are all, like, clinging to the afterlife.
Right, and I think it's interesting that he seems to find more comfort in the living than he does in dwelling on death and what comes after.
Yeah, there's that scene where he sees a rat running into a crypt,
Oh, right.
and he talks about how quickly it would pick a guy clean.
Yeah,
It's so morbid.
it's morbid, but it also reveals this kind of pragmatic acceptance of death as just like a natural process,
Yeah.
you know?
Right, and it's like while everyone else is spouting all these grand pronouncements about death and the afterlife,
Yes.
Bloom's over there just observing,
Right.
quietly forming his own conclusions.
Exactly.
But even with his grounded perspective, there are moments where the macabre still kind of gets to him, right?
It's that paradox that Joyce is always playing with.
Yeah.
This simultaneous repulsion and fascination with death.
Yeah.
Like, they're disgusted by decay, but they can't resist gossiping about, gruesome crimes.
Totally.
They're afraid of death, but they're also obsessed with it.
Right, yeah, like when they pass that house where the murder happened and they're all talking about the legal system and protecting the innocent, but it feels so hollow coming from these people who, seem perfectly willing to exploit others for personal gain.
It all circles back to that hypocrisy, right?
Yeah.
Like, they discuss these abstract principles, but they don't seem to apply them to their own lives.
Right, and it's against this whole backdrop of death and moral decay that we see Bloom going through this personal transformation.
Absolutely.
He's literally on this journey through the streets of Dublin, but also metaphorically through his own internal landscape. Like,
Right.
the funeral becomes this crucible for him, It forces him to confront his own mortality and his shifting views on religion.
Yes,
And I think ultimately the reality of how people perceive him.
absolutely.
So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on his big aha moment?
Well, there's that scene where Bloom is trying to help John Henry Menton with his crushed hat.
Oh, yeah,
It's a small gesture of kindness, but Menton completely ignores him.
right.
And Bloom is left feeling, kind of deflated. And I think it's symbolic of this disconnect between Bloom and the rest of the group.
Yeah, like he's trying to connect, but they're just not interested.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then comes that powerful ending line, "How grand we are this morning."
That line is amazing.
It is, yeah.
It's like a light bulb goes off for Bloom in that moment.
Right.
You know, he sees these people for who they truly are.
Yeah.
Self-important, hypocritical, blind to their own flaws.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real shift. He
Yeah.
separates himself both physically and mentally from their judgment and their expectations.
And it's a turning point.
It is a turning point, yeah.
He's no longer seeking their approval.
Right.
He's starting to forge his own path.
He's stepping out from the shadows of others and into his own light.
Yeah.
And it's through that journey that he begins to bloom as a character.
He does, yeah.
Which is really interesting considering his name.
Oh, no, right.
Bloom.
It's like...
It suggests this continual growth.
Yeah.
This blossoming into a more complete person.
Totally,
You know?
yeah.
So it's really fascinating how Joyce uses that name to kind of foreshadow his development.
It is. It's like everything is intentional with Joyce.
Oh, absolutely.
It's incredible.
Yeah, he's a master of that.
He is.
You know, just packing these layers of meaning into every single detail.
Yeah. And he's always challenging us to think deeper and look closer.
Exactly. You got to be paying attention with Joyce.
You do. You can't just skim the surface.
No, you'll miss all the good stuff.
You miss all the good stuff.
You really do.
You really do.
It's like a puzzle. You got to put all the pieces together.
Yeah, it's a delicious puzzle, though.
It is.
I mean, it's so rewarding.
Totally.
When you start to see those connections.
That is so satisfying.
Yeah, so satisfying. So
It's like a little aha moment every time.
every time. And Hades is just full of them.
Oh, it really is.
We could probably spend hours just unpacking this one episode.
We could. There's so much there.
There's so much there, but I think we've laid a good foundation
We have.
for understanding Bloom's transformation in this chapter
Absolutely.
and his evolving relationship with death and religion.
And with the other characters, too.
Yeah, and with the other characters,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's all connected.
It's all connected, but there's still so much more to explore.
Oh, for sure.
And especially this whole idea of metempsychosis,
Right, yeah.
which I think is key to understanding not just Bloom's journey,
Mhm.
but maybe even Joyce's artistic vision for the entire book.
Absolutely. It's a big concept, but it's worth unpacking.
It is. It is. So
let's dive into that next.
let's dive into that next.
All right. And this whole idea of blooming kind of ties in beautifully with a concept that Molly brings up earlier in the book.
Oh.
You remember metempsychosis?
Metempsychosis, right.
Right.
Yeah, I remember when she asked him about it.
Yeah,
And it's basically like reincarnation, right?
exactly. The transmigration of the soul.
Right, like the soul moving from one form to another.
Yeah, from one being to another.
Right, and at the time it just seemed like a random question.
Right.
But now I'm starting to see how it connects to this whole idea of transformation.
Absolutely. Joyce isn't just, throwing words around. Metempsychosis is really key to understanding, not just Bloom's personal growth, but maybe even the whole structure of Ulysses.
Whoa, hold on. What do you mean? How does reincarnation apply to the whole book?
Well, think about it this way. What if Ulysses is actually the story of Stephen Dedalus transforming into Leopold Bloom?
Okay, that's a pretty mind-blowing theory.
Yeah.
But they're such different characters. How could that even work?
It's true. They are very different.
Yeah.
Stephen is young, he's idealistic, but also deeply troubled by his mother's death.
Right.
Struggling with his faith.
Yeah.
He's very much a literary type,
Uh-huh.
focused on language and his own kind of artistic ambitions.
Right.
Bloom, on the other hand,
Yeah.
is older, more practical, seems to be at peace with, the complexities of life,
Yeah.
grounded in the everyday realities of work, family, even bodily functions,
Yeah.
all this stuff that Stephen seems to avoid.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, so you're suggesting that Bloom is like a more mature, evolved version of Stephen.
I think so.
Like Stephen's the caterpillar, Bloom's the butterfly.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it,
Okay. Yeah.
And remember, Joyce's earlier works were all about Stephen Dedalus.
They were, yeah.
Many believe that he's like a semi-autobiographical character for Joyce himself.
Right.
So what if Ulysses represents Joyce moving beyond that earlier stage of his life
Okay.
and embodying this more, mature, accepting persona of Leopold Bloom?
Wow, that's a pretty radical way to look at the book, but it really makes you think.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider how Bloom handles death and religion in Hades.
Absolutely.
He doesn't need religious beliefs to find meaning or comfort.
Right.
He seems to have accepted mortality.
Yeah.
And he embraces the beauty of like the present moment, which is something that Stephen really struggles with.
He does. He's not afraid of the vast black hole that terrifies Stephen.
Right.
And that acceptance, that ability to find meaning in everyday life,
Yeah.
I think is a key part